My name is Louise Morgan. I am 90 years old. And before we begin, let me tell you something that usually makes people uncomfortable. For the last 28 years, I have refused to live my life according to fear. That decision upset doctors. It upset neighbors. It upset family members. It even upset some of my closest friends. But here I am, 90 years old, living alone in the same little white house I've lived in since 1971, still tending my roses, still driving myself to church every Sunday morning, still reading without glasses most days, still remembering names, birthdays, and stories from 60 years ago. And every time someone asks how I've managed to stay healthy this long, they expect me to reveal some miracle supplement or secret medical treatment. Instead, I tell them something much simpler. I stopped letting fear make my decisions. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not against medicine. If I break a hip, take me to a hospital. If I'm bleeding, call an ambulance. If I need surgery, thank God we have surgeons. But somewhere along the way, medicine stopped being about helping people recover and started convincing perfectly functional people that they were permanently sick. And that is where my story begins. I was 62 years old when a doctor first told me that I should start preparing for decline. I remember the exact room, the pale green walls, the smell of disinfectant, the ticking clock behind his desk. He looked at my chart for nearly 5 minutes before speaking. Then he adjusted his glasses and said something that changed my life. "Mrs. Morgan, at your age, we need to start managing expectations. Managing expectations. Such polite words, such dangerous words." I asked him what he meant. He explained that energy would decrease, strength would fade, memory would weaken, sleep would become unreliable, pain would become normal, and most importantly, I needed to accept that aging meant surrendering certain parts of life. I sat there quietly while he spoke. Then I asked him a question. "How old are you, doctor?" He smiled. 43, I nodded. Then I said something he clearly didn't expect. "So you're explaining old age to me from experience?" The smile disappeared. That was the first moment I realized something important. Many people speak with certainty about things they've never personally experienced. And nowhere is that more common than aging. The truth is that most experts study old age. Very few actually live it. I left that office with a handful of brochures about declining health. I threw them away before I got home, not because I thought I was immortal, not because I believed I would never age, but because I refused to rehearse my own decline before it arrived. For years afterward, I watched people around me do exactly that. The moment they reached retirement age, they began shrinking their lives, not physically at first, mentally. They stopped traveling, stopped learning, stopped making plans. They started talking about themselves as if they were already disappearing. And something strange happened. Within a few years, many of them were. My husband, Robert, used to say something that sounded foolish when we were young. He would point to an old abandoned barn outside town and say, "Everything dies twice, Louise, first in the mind, then in reality." At the time, I thought it was just one of his country sayings. Now I know he was right. The first thing that ages is not the body, it's the imagination. The day people stop believing tomorrow matters, they begin growing old faster than any calendar can measure. I learned that lesson the hard way. When Robert died, I was 68. We had been married for 44 years. 44 years. Imagine sharing breakfast with the same person for nearly half a century. Imagine hearing the same laugh every day. Imagine building an entire world around one human being. And then imagine waking up one morning to discover they're gone. That first year nearly destroyed me. People think grief is sadness. It isn't. Sadness comes and goes. Grief moves into the house. It sits at your table, sleeps in your bed, follows you from room to room. For months, I barely functioned. Friends worried about me. My daughter called constantly. Church members brought casseroles. Everyone had advice. Everyone wanted to help. But one afternoon changed everything. I was sitting in the backyard staring at nothing. A widow from church named Margaret came to visit. She was 82 at the time. Her husband had died nearly 20 years earlier. She sat beside me for almost an hour without saying much. Then she pointed at my neglected garden. Weeds were everywhere. Flowers were dying. The place looked abandoned. Finally, she said, "Robert's gone, Louise, but you're not." That was it. One sentence. Not a speech, not therapy, not advice, just truth. Robert's gone, but you're not. Something shifted inside me. The next morning I walked outside and pulled one weed, just one. The following day I pulled 10. The day after that, 20. Within weeks the garden looked alive again, and strangely enough, so did I. That experience taught me something no doctor ever explained. Purpose heals things medicine cannot reach. A prescription can lower blood pressure. It cannot give you a reason to wake up. A pill can reduce symptoms. It cannot create meaning. A treatment can extend life. It cannot teach you how to live. And yet meaning may be the most powerful medicine of all. Over the years, I began noticing a pattern. The healthiest older people weren't necessarily the ones with perfect medical charts. They were the people with reasons to get out of bed. One man restored old furniture. One woman taught piano. Another volunteered at the library. Another cared for grandchildren. They had purpose, direction, responsibility, life pulling them forward. Then there were others, people who spent entire days waiting for appointments, waiting for tests, waiting for results, waiting for retirement, waiting for symptoms, waiting for the next problem, and eventually waiting became their identity. I made a promise to myself after Robert died. I would never spend the rest of my life waiting. So I started saying yes. Yes to gardening classes. Yes to road trips. Yes to community projects. Yes to learning things that made me feel foolish. At 71, I learned how to use a computer. At 74, I took an art class. At 77, I joined a walking group. At 81, I planted the largest vegetable garden I'd ever attempted. At 85, I started writing letters to my great-grandchildren about family history. People acted surprised, as if curiosity has an expiration date, as if growth belongs exclusively to the young. But here's what nobody tells you. The human spirit doesn't retire. Only habits do. Your age doesn't decide whether you're alive. Your engagement does. I remember meeting a woman who was only 56. She talked constantly about being old. Too old to travel. Too old to learn. Too old to start over. Too old for dreams. I felt exhausted after 10 minutes with her. Then later that same week, I met a 93-year-old man who was planning a fishing trip 3 states away. Guess which one seemed younger? Age is a number. Aliveness is a choice. And that realization eventually brought me into conflict with the medical world, because many conversations about aging begin with limitations. What will decline? What will weaken? What will stop working? What risks are increasing? What dangers are approaching? And while some of those concerns are real, they become dangerous when they are the only story being told. Fear changes behavior. Behavior changes outcomes. Outcomes reinforce fear. It's a cycle, a terrible cycle, one that traps millions of older adults. By the time I reached my 70s, I noticed something else. Every year seemed to bring a new warning. Don't eat this. Avoid that. Watch out for this condition. Monitor that number. Track this symptom. Screen for that risk. Eventually I realized something. If I followed every warning perfectly, I wouldn't have time left to actually live. And that's when I began asking different questions. Questions that many people never ask. Questions that changed everything. Questions I'll share with you next. Because the moment I started questioning fear itself was the moment my life truly began again. And what happened after that surprised everyone, including me. The older I became, the more I noticed something strange. People were no longer asking me how I felt. They were asking what was wrong with me. Think about that for a moment. When you're young, people ask about your plans, your dreams, your future. But somewhere around retirement age, the conversation changes. Suddenly, everyone wants to discuss medications, symptoms, diagnoses, and limitations. It's as if society quietly decides that older people are no longer living. They're simply managing decline. I refuse to accept that, not because I was extraordinary, not because I possessed some secret knowledge, but because reality kept showing me something different. I remember turning 72. A routine appointment had been scheduled. The doctor looked at my records and began listing concerns, potential concerns, future concerns, possible concerns, hypothetical concerns. By the time he finished speaking, I felt like a woman standing in front of a firing squad waiting for bad news. Then he paused. Do you have any symptoms? I looked at him. No. Any pain? No. Any dizziness? No. Any confusion? No. Any difficulty walking? No. Trouble sleeping? No. He stared at the chart, then at me, then back at the chart again. I almost laughed. The paper seemed far more worried about me than my body was. That afternoon, I drove home through the countryside, windows down, warm summer air moving through the car, and a question appeared in my mind. How much of modern aging is caused by fear itself? Not all of it, of course not. Bodies change. Time leaves its marks, but fear has consequences too. Fear makes people stop moving. Fear makes people isolate themselves. Fear convinces them they are fragile. Fear turns ordinary discomfort into catastrophe. And once people begin treating themselves as fragile, something inside them starts agreeing. I watched it happen over and over again. There was a woman named Evelyn. She lived 3 houses down from me. At 69, she was energetic, social, and active. Then she received a diagnosis that frightened her. Nothing life-threatening, nothing immediately dangerous, but enough to make her afraid. Within a year, she stopped gardening. Within 2 years, she stopped traveling. Within 3 years, she stopped attending church. Every decision became centered around avoiding risk. Eventually, she spent most of her time sitting indoors. By 76, she looked 20 years older, not because of the diagnosis, because of the fear. The fear stole more from her than the condition ever did. That lesson stayed with me. I began paying attention to people who aged well, not celebrities, not influencers, not television doctors, real people, people in towns, people in churches, people in neighborhoods, people who quietly reached 85, 90, 95. What did they have in common? The answer surprised me. None of them spent much time talking about longevity. They were too busy living. One man repaired bicycles for children. One woman baked bread every Saturday. Another painted landscapes. Another volunteered at the animal shelter. Their lives were filled with activity, connection, and purpose, not obsession, not optimization, not endless self-monitoring. Purpose. And that realization changed how I viewed health entirely. Health wasn't something you chased. It was often the result of having something worth chasing. Years later, after I turned 78, another experience reinforced that lesson. I was attending a family gathering. My grandson Ethan was there. At the time, he was only 16. Tall, energetic, and constantly asking questions. At one point, he sat beside me and asked something unexpected. "Grandma, why are you always happy?" I laughed. Always happy. If only he knew. I'd buried my husband, lost friends, experienced heartbreak, faced disappointments. Life had not been easy, but his question stayed with me. Later that evening, I thought carefully about it. Maybe happiness wasn't the right word. Maybe what people were seeing was gratitude. Gratitude changes everything. When you're grateful, ordinary moments become enough. A cup of coffee, a sunrise, a conversation, fresh tomatoes from the garden, the sound of rain on the roof. a phone call from someone you love. People spend decades chasing extraordinary happiness while overlooking ordinary joy. But ordinary joy is what fills a life, not grand achievements, not constant excitement, small moments, repeated thousands of times. I believe that's one reason many older people struggle. Nobody teaches us how to appreciate ordinary days. We're taught to pursue milestones, promotions, awards, goals, recognition. Then one day those things disappear. And if we never learned how to enjoy simple existence, we feel lost. I learned late, but thankfully not too late. By 80, my daily routine had become remarkably simple. I woke early, opened the curtains, made breakfast, spent time outdoors, moved my body, spoke with people I cared about, read books, worked in the garden, prayed, rested, and repeated. Nothing complicated, nothing expensive, nothing revolutionary. Yet people constantly ask for my secret, as if simplicity couldn't possibly be the answer. But perhaps simplicity is exactly what we've forgotten. Around that time, another doctor entered my life. He was younger than my grandchildren, bright, polite, clearly intelligent. During one appointment, he reviewed my records and asked a question. "Mrs. Morgan, what's your exercise routine?" I told him, "I walk." He smiled. "Anything else?" "I garden." He waited. "Anything else?" I shook my head. "No." He looked genuinely puzzled. Perhaps he expected specialized programs, fitness trackers, complicated regimens. Instead, he found a woman who simply moved every day. The human body understands movement, not necessarily workouts. Movement, walking, lifting, carrying, stretching, reaching, climbing. Nature designed us for activity long before exercise became an industry. And perhaps that's why so many older people remain healthier than expected when they stay active naturally. I never exercised because I feared aging. I moved because life required movement. There is a difference. Fear-based habits rarely last. Purpose-based habits often last a lifetime. By 83, another pattern became impossible to ignore. The people around me who struggled most weren't always those with physical problems. Many were lonely, terribly lonely. Loneliness is one of the great tragedies of modern life, especially among older adults. Human beings are not designed for isolation. We need conversation, touch, laughter, community, shared experiences, someone who notices when we're gone, someone who cares whether we arrive home safely, someone who remembers our stories. When Robert died, loneliness nearly consumed me. What saved me wasn't medicine. It was people, neighbors, friends, family, church members. Connection kept me alive, and I believe it continues to keep me alive today. One winter evening, I found myself reflecting on everyone I'd known. The list was enormous. Friends from childhood, former co-workers, neighbors, relatives, classmates. Some had lived healthy lifestyles, others hadn't. Some exercised daily, others never exercised at all. Some followed every medical recommendation, others ignored most of them. Yet longevity rarely followed predictable rules. The healthiest looking person sometimes died unexpectedly. The supposedly fragile person sometimes reached 95. Life was more complicated than formulas, far more complicated. That realization humbled me, and it made me skeptical whenever someone claimed to possess all the answers. Because aging isn't a math equation. It's a human experience. Messy, unpredictable, beautiful, painful, mysterious. No chart can fully capture it. No statistic can completely explain it. As my 80th birthday faded into my rearview mirror, I reached a conclusion that would guide the rest of my life. I would respect expertise, but I would never surrender common sense. I would listen to professionals, but I would also listen to my own experience. I would value science, but I would not worship authority. Most importantly, I would never allow fear to become my primary advisor, because fear has one goal: to shrink your life, and I was not interested in shrinking. Not at 80, not at 90, not ever. What happened next, however, challenged everything I thought I knew. Because in my late 80s, life delivered a test far greater than any doctor's prediction, a test that forced me to choose between fear and freedom once again. And the decision I made changed the way I view aging forever. As we get older, people seem to repeat the same advice again and again. Be careful. Be careful when you walk. Be careful when you drive. Be careful when you travel. Be careful when you try something new. And of course, there is nothing wrong with being careful. In fact, a certain amount of caution is necessary. Life comes with risks, and wisdom often means knowing which risks are worth taking. But there is a difference between being careful and being afraid. When fear starts making all your decisions, life becomes smaller. You stop exploring. You stop trying new things. You stop enjoying the simple experiences that make life meaningful. I learned that lesson clearly when I was 87 years old. One morning, I was working in my garden, enjoying the fresh air and sunshine. Gardening had always been one of my favorite activities. It kept me moving, gave me purpose, and connected me with nature. As I walked across the yard, my foot caught on a tree root hidden beneath the grass. Before I knew it, I was on the ground. The fall was sudden and painful. For a few moments, I simply lay there, catching my breath and wondering if I had seriously injured myself. Thankfully, nothing seemed broken. Still, my daughter insisted that I visit a doctor just to be safe. After examining me carefully, the doctor smiled and said, "You were lucky." Maybe I was. But as I thought about it later, I realized luck wasn't the whole story. I believe that staying active for decades played a role too. For years, I had walked regularly, worked in my garden, carried groceries, climbed stairs, and stayed physically engaged with life. Those small daily habits had quietly built strength and resilience. Strength doesn't appear overnight. It grows slowly. It comes from the little things you do consistently over many years. That's why I believe the goal isn't to avoid every fall. The goal is to be strong enough to get back up when life knocks you down. Because sooner or later, life knocks everyone down. A few months after that fall, I faced a challenge that was much harder. I lost my dear friend Ruth. We had known each other for more than 30 years. Over those decades, we shared countless conversations, celebrations, holidays, and memories. She wasn't just a friend. She was part of my life story. When she passed away, the loss hit me deeply. People sometimes assume that getting older makes loss easier because you've experienced it before. In my experience, that's not true. Loss never becomes easy. If anything, it becomes more meaningful because every person carries years of shared memories with them. When someone you've known for decades leaves this world, it feels as though a piece of your own history disappears too. For weeks after Ruth's passing, I found myself reflecting on life more than usual. One evening, I sat outside watching the sunset. The sky was painted with shades of orange, pink, and gold. The air was calm. The world felt peaceful. As I watched the sun slowly disappear below the horizon, I had a simple realization. Many people spend their entire lives preparing to live instead of actually living. They wait for the perfect time, the perfect opportunity, the perfect amount of money, the perfect circumstances. They keep postponing happiness until someday, but someday isn't guaranteed. Life is happening right now. That evening changed something inside me. I stopped measuring life by years. Instead, I started measuring it by moments. Moments spent with family, moments spent with friends, moments filled with laughter, conversation, learning, and gratitude. The older I get, the more I realize that life isn't really about counting years. It's about making the years count. People often ask me what the secret is to living a long life. They expect some complicated answer, maybe a special diet, maybe an expensive supplement, maybe some hidden trick. But honestly, my answer is very simple. Eat good, simple food. Stay active every day. Get enough rest. Spend time with people you love. Keep learning new things. Stay curious about the world. Forgive people whenever possible. Laugh whenever you can. Appreciate the little things. Don't carry unnecessary bitterness. That's all. No magic formula. No miracle cure. Just simple habits practiced consistently over many years. Most of life's biggest results come from small actions repeated over time. One healthy meal doesn't change your life. One walk doesn't change your life. One good conversation doesn't change your life, but thousands of them do. When I was 89, my great-granddaughter Emma came to visit. She was full of energy and curiosity, as children often are. At one point, she looked at me and asked a question that made me pause. "What's the most important thing you've learned?" For a moment, I thought carefully about my answer. After 89 years, there were many lessons I could have shared, but one stood above all the others. I looked at her and said, "Don't be afraid to live." She smiled, though I'm not sure she fully understood what I meant. Perhaps that's because many adults struggle to understand it too. Fear is powerful. It steals time. It steals opportunities. It steals relationships. It steals adventures. It steals happiness. Many people spend years worrying about things that never happen. Meanwhile, life quietly passes by. They miss chances to travel. They miss chances to connect with others. They miss chances to create memories. And often they don't realize what they've lost until it's too late. That doesn't mean we should ignore risks or act recklessly. It simply means we shouldn't allow fear to become the ruler of our lives. Now, at 90 years old, I can honestly say these years have been some of the happiest of my life. Not because everything is perfect, not because I have avoided hardship, not because I have escaped loss. I've experienced all of those things, but I finally understand what truly matters. The people, the memories, the conversations, the laughter, the quiet mornings, the family gatherings, the small everyday moments that seem ordinary at the time but become priceless later. Those are the things that stay with us. Doctors can give advice, and good advice is valuable. We should listen to medical professionals and take care of our health, but nobody else can live your life for you. Nobody else can decide what gives your life meaning. Nobody else can choose how you spend your days. That responsibility belongs to you. Take care of your health, respect good advice, make wise decisions, but don't let fear control your life. One day, every one of us will reach the end of our journey. That is simply part of being human. What matters most is whether we spent our time truly living or simply worrying, whether we loved deeply, whether we learned continuously, whether we appreciated the gift of being alive. So tomorrow, do something simple. Call someone you love. Take a walk. Read a book. Learn something new. Start a conversation. Watch a sunset. Help someone. Make a good memory. Not because you'll live forever, but because you're alive today. And today is a gift. My name is Louise Morgan. I am 90 years old. I have experienced joy and heartbreak, success and failure, love and loss. And after all these years, one thing is absolutely clear to me. A long life is a gift, but a full life is a choice.